everybody, welcome to Catherine Sews. Thank you so much for joining me today. I recently participated in the Sew Frugal 23 challenge, in which participants have to find a free online pattern and then pair it with a fabric in their stash. So looking through all the entries for that challenge, the one that struck me the most was this one from Helen Sew Evans, where she sewed the Chelsea top from fabricstore.com. And I just thought it looked so nice on her. I thought she did a beautiful job and I just wanted to make one too. She mentioned a couple challenges to the pattern in her comments on Instagram, and I thought maybe I could address those here. So I messaged Helen, asked her if it was okay if I used her picture in my video. She kindly agreed. So I'm going to use that pattern, the Chelsea pattern. I'll show you what her concerns were, and believe me, I fully agree with her concerns, but I actually found another concern in the way that they made their sizing. So I just want to show you that. So let me just show you how to deal with that and how to make that top just a little bit easier, because I think it really is a beauty and well worth doing. I found in my stash this kind of silky palm tree fabric, and I thought that would be like a nice wardrobe builder. Like the black, I wear black and white probably too much, but it'll go with everything I have. And so I'm going to make the top, but then I'm also going to make a matching skirt. So that when I wear the two together, it'll have the look of a dress, but I'll still be able to wear those two pieces with other things too. I love that. I think that's a great way to build a capsule wardrobe. So the skirt pattern that I'm going to use is the skirt of the dress that I made a couple videos ago, and I'll link that here. Now that doesn't really help you though to get a pattern like that, so I'm just going to show you super quickly how you can draft sort of a simpler version of the same kind of skirt. Really easy, nice and quick. I'll show you how to break it down like no nonsense, okay? The first thing I'll do is show you some of the issues that Helen and other people have had with that Chelsea pattern. I'll show you how you can easily remedy those issues, and then hopefully that Chelsea pattern becomes pretty easy and straightforward for even a novice sewer to make. So if that sounds good to you, let's get busy. Her first concern was that there are no notches on the pattern to tell you which way to insert the sleeves. So normally there would be a single notch on the front and a double notch on the back along that raglan sleeve opening, and then you'd have corresponding notches on the front side of the sleeve and the back side of the sleeve. So I'll show you how to easily add those yourself. Also, there are no marks on the pattern that tell you where or how big to make those pleats on the neckline. So I'm going to just add my own notches there to make those neckline pleats. And then the last thing that she said was tricky was the neck binding. Their technique is beautiful and quite well explained, but it is more advanced. So let me see if I can help with that as well. So the notches that you see here are just notches that I have added. So let me show you how I arrived at that. It's not that hard. This is a raglan sleeve on the Chelsea top, and it's not very exaggerated, but you can see that this corner stands up higher. That one is the back. But if you're not sure, if it's just too subtle, just fold it in half and you'll see that the taller one is the back. And so all I did was put it together with the back piece. Forgive all this printing on the back. I just accidentally printed it two-sided at first. So then I just matched up the top corner and made my notch there, and it can be anywhere along here. So I matched up the top corner and put a double notch for the back. Same thing to the front. Matched up the top corner and put a single notch for the front. So that's pretty easy peasy. Then we had the issue of the pleat on the neckline. And in the instructions, it says that it should be no more than 3/8 of an inch when it's folded. So that means 3/4 of an inch when it's not folded. I made a notch an inch or so in from that curve, and then another one at 3/4 of an inch over. I did the same thing on the back. So the first one is about 1.5 inches from the fold, and then 3/4 of an inch. I was also a little concerned about the way they graded the sizes. Can you see that the increments here are smaller than the increments here? These increments really should be the same. When I looked at it, I was afraid that by the time you get up to the bigger size, it would be really off. I had already cut my pieces out by the time I noticed that. And so I just reprinted the essential pieces just to show you. There's the front. This is just that same section of the sleeve. And so this is what I was looking at, that those should line up, right? And they really don't. So I thought that by extension, by the time you get out to the big sizes, it would be really off. But somehow they managed to come back together at the biggest size and the smallest size are fine. The ones in between are just a little bit off. The one that I'm cutting is the furthest off. They really should match. What I ended up doing is I cut my sleeve edge there at the one size smaller. That seemed to fit a bit better. It's a small difference, but I just thought I would mention it. Okay, so to start sewing, I'm laying my front piece right side up. And it's easy to tell that it's my front piece now because I've got that single notch. And then I'm going to take my sleeves now, and there's my double notch. So I know that's going to be sewing to the back. Here's my single notch. I really appreciate notches. They're just little pieces of information that help you piece it all together. I think it's an easy enough thing to add for yourself. But you know what? It's a free pattern, so are we really going to complain? There's one seam. That sleeve will come out. Other sleeve goes to the other side. So this is my front. Here are my two sleeves. There's my double notch. So those edges are where the back will sew to. And this edge comes over to here. So there's my double notch going to my double notch on the sleeve edge. Okay, so now you can see all 4 of those seams are pinned, and I'm just going to go and sew all 4 of them. Make sure to keep your edges together on all these seams. And I'll go right from that seam right into the next one. Two more seams just like that, and then to the serger. And now I'll just serge all 4 of those seams. Having them chained together like that from the sewing machine does make it easier to find the next seam. And the instructions say press to one side, preferably toward the sleeve. That is not my preference at all. I always prefer a sleeve seam to be pressed toward the body. To me, it just looks like the sleeve is an integral piece of the garment instead of like a piece that was added on after. I just like that to be toward the body. Okay, let's add in a little edge stitch along all 4 of those seams. And again, I'm going toward the body. My goodness, it's hard for me to see that seam to follow it. Kind of have to go by feel. And then going right into the next seam. All right, I think that little edge stitch adds a nice touch. While I am here, I think I'll sew the side seams now. Corner to corner on the bottom of the sleeve, front and back right side together. And as soon as my back tack is done, find my next matching point, which is the underarm seam. Match that up. And then my next matching point, which is the bottom edge. And then I can find halfway and hold on to that. So I'll sew both of the side seams, but I'm not going to serge yet until I've tried it on. Just before I try it on, I'm going to fold in those little pleats. So the notch that's closer to the seam is going to come over and meet the one that's a little further away from the seam. And then again, the one that's closer to the seam will fold over and meet the one that's a little further from the seam. And the same on the back. So now I'll just pop that over my head and see how that looks. Okay, so it's not bad, it's just a little roomy. I chose the size 12-14 based on the finished garment measurements. I didn't want it form-fitting at all, but this is a little too big. So I'm gonna pop it on inside out. Having it on inside out makes it much easier to take in any side seams. But it's just all this under here. It's also quite long. I think it's longer than I need. If I'm ever to do this one again, I would definitely go down a size or 2. With the top off now, I've got it folded in half so that I can duplicate these pins on both sides. So I'll just peek under and put a pin the same on both sides. Maybe when I re-sew this seam, I'll leave a little slit at the bottom. I think that might be nice. I think I will just give myself a little notch, 4 inches from the bottom. I'll start sewing there, 4 inches from the bottom and in there. That'll be all right. So there's my notch. I'll just start right opposite that, but in line with this first pin. And then I just sew from pin to pin. both sides like that, and then I'll try it on again inside out. Make sure I'm happy before I trim off the extra. And I think I'm safe to sew over the ends of the pleats. So I'll just make a small back tack on each one, less than 1/4 inch away from the edge, because I don't want this little stitch to show later. So there comes a point in every project where you're just riddled with self-doubt and you're not even sure if you're going to like this. And that's where I am. I got here pretty early on this one. So those pleats on the neckline, I thought they were going to be okay. They're totally not okay. See how it makes like this funny shape neckline? I debated a bit. Do I just leave the pleat and then scoop the neckline down a little bit more to make it look curved again? In the one that Helen sewed, she used the beautiful linen, which is what fabricstore.com is known for, beautiful linens. And these pleats would press beautifully into that crisp linen. But on this synthetic fabric, it's just not working. So the pleats are out. Okay, pleats are going to go. I'm going to unpick that. The neck will be more open, especially if I'm doing this with a matching skirt. It's just a lot of fabric, and it's just like, I feel just too covered in black and white palm trees, and I just need a little bit more breathing space. So we'll see how this goes. So let's just persevere, see where we get to. So now I'll just cut a finger width away from my new stitching line, right down to the bottom. And it is longer than I expected. I think I'll just take 1 inch off the bottom. So my little slit on the side is going to be quite short. Alrighty, at the serger now, I'll make a snip about 1 inch above where my little slit starts on the side seam. And then I'll serge the side seams just to this point. I'll leave these edges free so I can make a small hem. Good. And then while I'm here, I'll serge around the bottom of the sleeve as well. Other side the same way. So I just turned up a double fold across the hem, tried to be nice and straight and even. I just have the little sides of the slit to deal with. It just seemed like that slit was just a little too short, and this inch was a little bit more than I needed, wasn't it? So I'm just taking out a few stitches. I did replace my back tack a little bit higher. So yeah, if your snip was 1/2 inch above the top of the slit, that will be fine. So now what I want to do is just do a little double fold here. Little fold, like 1/4 inch, less than 1 centimeter. Put that under the needle and do a back tack. And I'm pulling my thread to make sure that that end doesn't get sucked into the machine. Following that fold up, I want that fold to blend nicely into the seam, and I'm just sewing on the outer edge of that fold. Come up a little past, my needle down, lift and pivot, and on the other side, same thing, straight across, and pivot. Come down and finish it off. There we go. Good, so that's the bottom of the slit finished off. Once I give that a little press, that'll look smart. So I tried it on again without the pleats, and it sits so much nicer. I still want to drop the neckline down though. It makes a prettier neckline when it's down here. So with it folded in half, I can make sure I'm cutting it symmetrically, and I think that's going to be much prettier. I'll feel more comfortable. So it was just looking like way too much black and white palm trees for me. And I just wanted to break that up a bit. So I played around on a screenshot, just adding little lines of red. And I think I like the way that breaks it up. I tried putting the lines on the raglan seams as well, but I'm just convincing myself that that is not necessary because I don't want to unpick those, the top stitching and everything. So I think just the neck and the end of the sleeves. So in my stash, I have this divine red satin. It feels like real silk. I think it is. This is not. Like I can tell from feeling that that's a synthetic, but this one has that real silk feel. It's almost too good. But the color, I just love how this color just brightens up that black. It'll just be like a little hint of the red around the neck. I think that's lovely. So let's do that. First thing I need to do then is cut off the sleeves. I just tried it on. My line is way up here. Here is my raglan seam. So I'm going to leave about 1 inch there. And I'll cut seam allowance width away from that line there. And I'll bring this back out in a curve. I'm a little nervous. I'm too scared. So I'm going to cut a little bit away from my line and see how that sits when I try it on again. I just tried that on. This sits just really cute, really nice. But one thing I want to do while I'm still here at the machine is put a little bit of a basting stitch around the top of the sleeve edge. Just because when I had it on, it looked like it might end up gaping there or flaring out a bit. So I'm just going to run a basting stitch so I can control that extra fabric a little bit. So extra long stitch length and no back tacks. And I don't want to cut my thread short. So you can see how that thread just sort of pulls it in a little bit. I don't want it to look gathered. I just want it to not flare out. So this is the cross grain. This is the straight grain. Bias is the angle in between. And I wanted these two for the sleeve to be 20 inches. And that's an approximation because we're going to find out for sure as we pin it to the garment. And then one that's 30 inches long. So the Chelsea pattern instructions have a little link to more instructions as to how to make a bias facing. Their instructions are just perfect for that. They're really beautiful, nice clear instructions, but theirs tucks to the inside where you don't see it. But of course I want the red to show, so I'll be doing this a little bit differently and quite a bit more easily, honestly. Here are my bias strips pressed in half. They just feel exquisite, and that's how they should feel. If you cut them nice and straight, press them in half as even as you can. Bias is just a pleasure to work with because it's so malleable, like it will just do what you want it to do. So I found the center of that, putting it right side together with the center of the top. I don't want to say to stretch it, you just encourage it around. Now here's where I ran a ease stitch along the top edge of the sleeve because I don't want it standing out away from the body. There's the notch I gave myself at the center back. So there's where I'll be putting a little seam. So I gave myself more extra than I needed. That ease stitch is not making any gathers. It's just kind of shrinking that edge in for me. So when I get to the center back here, pin there. Those two pins are where I'm going to be making a seam in the bias. But you don't just make it through the folded bias like that. Of course, that'd be too easy. You have to open up the bias to make this look good. I'm going to give myself a little snip right where my pins are so that I can open that up. Good. So I'll make a little seam there and I can cut off the extra. Same process for around both armholes. My seam here is going to be at the center back. The seam for the bias around the arm, of course, will be at the bottom, like the side seam. So without disturbing all my other pins, I just want to sew a little seam straight across there. And then I just can finger press that open. So finger press that, and then bring that little seam to my center back notch. I want to sew this really nice and straight, but the edge I'm most concerned about being parallel to is this edge, the folded edge of the bias. So the way I'm here, where I'm seeing like a millimeter of the bias sticking out, that's where I want to stay. And I did test this needle out on a piece of scrap silk just to make sure it's not making any pulls. And this is the section that I eased in, and I want to make sure no little puckers are happening in here. And I'm not pulling it through. I'm just keeping a bit of tension on it as it goes through. I'm falling in love with this red with the black and white. I'm going to have to see if I can get a belt at the same color. It looks good, but there's too much red showing. So I'm going to go back over it again. One more line around, kind of coming in a bit closer. And now, don't freak out yet. It might look a little not great at this time. I'll be serging the inside edge and laying it down and edge stitching here in black. And once I give that a press, I think that's going to sit nicely. My little ease stitch around the sleeve, it has done its job, so I can remove that. And because it's a long stitch length with no back tacks, it pulls out really easily. Alrighty, so I've got it inside out at the iron. I'm bringing the bias strip in and the seam allowance out, and just trying to encourage it all to behave nicely. I think that's gorgeous. Before I go and serge this edge and top stitch, I'll do the same treatment to the two armholes the exact same way. So the two armholes are done as well, and now I'm going to serge around all three of those circles. And as I always say, if you don't have a serger, that's no problem. You can always just zigzag. So now I'm just running a little edge stitch right on the edge, like a millimeter away from my edge of the black. And this just makes it so that that serged edge is always going to stay to the inside. It's not ever going to roll and flip out. The top is done, and then I'm just going to finish off the skirt. And then I think I have to go and buy a red belt before I can show you the final product. For you to be able to draft your own skirt like this, you're going to start with a rectangle. To get this rectangle, you're going to take your hip measurement and add a little bit of ease. It really doesn't need much ease at all because we're going to be flaring this a little. So we're already adding in ease over the hip. We just need the top opening to be big enough to just shimmy over your hips. So let's say that your hip is 38 inches. And I think even 2 inches of ease around the hip is probably more than enough. You could get away with less, but just for the mathematics, let's add 2 inches for the ease. So that gives you 40 inches total that we want the entire circumference to be. We're going to make the front and back the same. And so this is half of the front or half of the back. So this is 1/4 of your entire skirt. So that will take that 40 inches and divide it by 4, because this is 1/4. So divided by 4 equals 10. Good. So this rectangle is just going to be 10 inches wide plus seam allowance. Okay. So 10 inches, and give yourself half an inch seam allowance. So that's going to be 10.5 inches. So just 1/4 of your hip plus ease plus seam allowance. The length is whatever you want it to be. The length plus seam allowance at the top, hem at the bottom. So give yourself half an inch at the top, and I just gave myself half an inch at the bottom as well. So 1 inch total, length plus an inch. Good. Alrighty, so now to flare it out, we're gonna make 3 slash marks, dividing it into 3. So you can divide it more, but 3 is a good number. And you'll notice that my panels are not exactly even. That is okay. So then we're going to cut on these slash marks, and I'm leaving a little tiny bridge at the top, just like that. That's it. And then you're going to tape it down to new paper with as much or as little flare as you want. But by starting with that rectangle, you automatically have your right angles at the side seams in the center. This you would place on fold, and you'd cut one for the front and one for the back. Like, that's really how simple it is. Mine has a slit in this area. So you could just do a slit on the side, no problem. But if you wanted to have a slit kind of where mine is located, you would just make these 2 separate pattern pieces, and don't forget to add seam allowance to both sides. Nothing to it, right? Awesome. For the skirt, I'm not going to go into a great deal of detail here because it's exactly the same as the skirt that I made in the 2 dresses to go video. I started by sewing the pockets. Everything else is going to be exactly the same except for the waistband. Obviously, I'll be putting this on a waistband since it's not attached to the top. So I'll show you how I'm going to do a partial elastic on the waistband. Everything on the skirt is done except for the waistband. This front section here, I want to keep that flat and have any elasticized part on the sides and back. So here's what I have left of my scrap fabric, and I'm just going to tear a piece full width of the fabric from selvage to selvage. So first I'm giving myself a good edge to measure from because this cut edge cannot be trusted. Fabric will tear straight between 2 yarns of the fabric, so it tears straight. And now I want to have this piece twice the width of my elastic plus seam allowance. So right there, tear again. This piece is just extra long because I'm going to be making a seam. I want to make one of my pieces line up with that center front panel with the seam allowance there and seam allowance on this side as well. So there's my seam. That'll do for seam allowance. So this is the front piece with no elastic. You could even interface that to keep it nice and flat. I think I will. I just fused a bit of interfacing onto that piece to keep that center front part nice and flat. The remainder of this strip needs to be the measurement of the whole rest of the skirt. There's my center back, and then fold that in half. And there's my other end. Now I want to take the two ends together. So I'll be joining these two ends together, there and there, right side together. So you can see that's going to fit together with this. Now, if this skirt had a lot of fullness, what I could do is actually gather this into that. I'm just going to sew those two little seams and come right back. I press the seams of the waistband going toward that center panel. I want seam allowance width at the bottom, and just make sure that wraps around nicely and lines up. So that's where I want one end of my elastic. I will be sewing right on that same line. Now, the other end of this elastic, that is the maximum. If I cut to here, there'd be no stretch at all. There'd be really not much point in the elastic. So I'm going to cut off 2 inches. This one I will just pin in place and then try that on. Okay, so that was actually just perfect. I didn't have to make any adjustments. So now the waistband just wraps down over the elastic. The seam allowance goes into that center panel so that the elastic does not have to fold back on itself. The elastic just stays nice and flat in there. I might even run a line of stitching right up in that seam so that the elastic can pull against the seam together and not go funny. And then I'll be basting the edge together all the way around the bottom of this. I don't want to catch the elastic in my pins here because the elastic is smaller than the band, so I need to be able to kind of shuffle it along like that. So I'll just baste that edge together and come right back. Then I just decided that I wanted belt loops for that red belt that I'm going to go out and buy right now. So I made a tube of fabric. I made it 3 inches wide and long enough for 5 belt loops. And then I sewed that tube in half and sort of halfway pressed the seam allowance open. Stick my safety pin on there and then dive it through. Then I'll just press that flat. And then the length that I want it even up with the raw edge, but seam allowance that I can turn under. So there. So that is 2 3/4 inches is what I want 5 of. So I'm taking a belt loop. If there's one side that looks better than the other, I'll have the good side facing up. I'm going to be putting one right on top of the seam, the raw edges even at the bottom, and tuck in the edge at the top. There's the front panel. I've got 1 belt loop on each side of it, 1 at the center back, and then 1 halfway between on each side. So now I've got the skirt inside out. The waistband is all constructed with the belt loops on it, looking good. And now it's going to go upside down inside the skirt, and I'll match up the seams of the front panel to the front panel of the waistband. All 3 raw edges together, and it's right side together. So that means that my belt loops are coming together with the skirt. The next matching point would be the center back. Yes, there's my center back belt loop. I'm just going to pin the pocket to the top there so that I can stretch that into place. Okay, good. So I'm stretching, grabbing all 3 raw edges, 2 of the waistband, 1 of the skirt, and pin it. The waistband just now can stretch to fit the skirt, and that's going to be pretty ducky, I think. So I'll sew all the way around this seam and then serge, and then I am done. And I think even though I pinned it from the outside, I think I'll sew it from the inside so that I can sew along that same line of stitching that's on the edge of the waistband. I'll be sewing right there or a little bit above. I just need to pick up both ends, stretch, and then go. Lots of threads, but the serger will trim those off when I get there. And all the way around like that. And I probably should just try it on one more time before I serge. It's all good, so we serge. Cutting off all my threads as I go. Done and dusted. Okay, so there's the waistband all done. Front section is going to always stay flat because there's no elastic there. The belt loops, and then the back waistband just has that bit of stretch. Nice. That came together really nice and easily. And then instead of going belt shopping, I'm doing the obvious thing, which you probably were already thinking. Why don't I just make a sash? So I tore a strip from the edge of this, the whole length, so it's 2 meters long. and 4.5 inches wide. I think I'll make little points. And then I'm just going to run to the machine, sew at the 15 line or 5/8 line the whole length, leave a gap at the center back, and be right back. So I've sewn around the whole thing, left a gap at the center back, and then just trim off excess around the 2 points. And then my handy dandy chopstick will be good for this. I'm going to poke in the corner and then push that chopstick all the way through to the gap. It's just braced against my tummy right now. There. Out of the gap like that. So this is definitely quicker and cheaper than going belt shopping. And it's perfect because it's removable. I can still wear the skirt with all kinds of different colors, but this will just look dynamite with that top. So now I'm just going to press this flat. The little opening just gets pressed in. You can, if you want, close it up by hand. On store-bought ones, often the gap is still there. It's just pressed in nicely, and when it's tied up tight, you never see the gap. So I'm just going to press that, and then I'll be ready to show you the finished product. So there we go. I have to say, I actually love this outfit. It feels almost fancy enough that I could wear it even to a wedding or out for dinner. It feels quite fancy with that red trim, but then I can break up the pieces and wear this top with red pants or black, or even white shorts would be super cute. Oh, white shorts, that would be really cute. And then, of course, I can wear the skirt with different tops too. I like mixing prints, and so like this little black and white spotted top could be kind of cute with it too. Or make it really casual with a couple of layered tank tops and some white sneakers. That gives it kind of more of a beachy feeling. I think I'm just going to get a ton of wear out of both pieces, separately and together. I'm so glad that I added the red. Don't you think that just made it? That red, that just works so well. I'm super happy about that. I really hope that this inspires you. So until next time on Catherine Sews, you take care.